ladies and gentlemen, no matter where you are, welcome to another live Golf Industry Guru Q&A call. I am your host, James Cronk. Behind the monitor, doing all the tech work, is Mr. Scott Massey, and we are thrilled and excited to have you back once again for this month's October 24th, 2025 live Q&A call. You know, Scott and I are always talking about who are the most interesting people in the world of golf, and how can we somehow convince them to come on to our podcast, our little podcast that we like to beam around the world. And we believe today we have, had a coup. You know, we feel like we've really been able to convince an individual that we have been fascinated with ever since he came on to the golf industry scene to really understand what is driving someone like Jeff Ma, an entrepreneur, an MIT grad, to get into the golf space. And I was fortunate enough to hear Jeff talk at the Golf Inc. Summit this few months ago, and I have no doubt that he is going to bring some fascinating thoughts about the golf industry. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Jeff Ma to the Golf Industry Guru podcast. Jeff, thank you so much for giving us some time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to join you.
Jeff,
I mean, you won me over with your humor on stage at the the TechCon Summit. So
anytime
you were your own best recruiter.
Well, I appreciate that. I was thinking you were the only person in the audience I was trying to get interested in my spiel.
Yeah, it worked.
Jeff, I know you must get tired of this question because people ask you all the time, but it's such a fascinating history, I would think, when you're in your 20s, you're at MIT, you all of a sudden find yourself in a fascinating scenario that eventually becomes a book, eventually Bringing Down the House, which I actually read when it first came out. It was one of my favorite stories that I had read. Had no idea, to be honest, the connection back at that time, but it was a great book that then was turned into a blockbuster movie with 21. Please just share with our audience and take as much time as you like. Just share with your audience from MIT or even before that to the world of golf. How's the transition?
I mean, it's a long journey. Ultimately, I think you're referencing my time at MIT, where a group of us went to Vegas and used math to beat the casinos. We did card counting. And it's funny because, like, with all of the buzz that we're getting right now with like these rigged poker games and things like that, what we did was 100% legal. It wasn't fraud. It was actually using your brain to beat a game. Blackjack is a beatable game because it has a memory, meaning like what you see impacts what you're going to see. And if you use that memory or use that data, you can make more optimal decisions, both from a betting standpoint and from a whether to hit or stand standpoint. And it's simple. When there's a lot of high cards left in the deck, it's in your favor and you bet more. When there's a lot of low cards left in the deck, it's in the dealer's favor and you bet less. And so this whole concept of using data from the past to drive better decision making is something that everyone thinks about now in the world of business. But in 2001, when I approached a friend of mine by the name of Ben Mesrick, who'd written 6 books at the time, but it's fair to say that his career was at a big crossroads and he was contemplating not being a writer anymore. I said, "Hey, I got a great idea for your next book." And he says, "What is it?" And I said, "Me and my buddies from MIT, we go to Vegas and we use math to beat the casinos." And he had this kind of glossy look that went over his face. And he said, "I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds." And then I ended up taking him to Vegas like 3 weeks later. And he said, "Oh my God, this is so cool. We should write a book about this. What you guys do is so cool." And I said, "Oh, great idea, Ben." And then eventually we pitched his publisher on this concept. And she also said, it's interesting, but I don't think anyone wants to read a book about a bunch of MIT nerds. And now, again, 2001, everything was different. There was no Moneyball. There was no poker on television. There were a fraction of the amount of casinos in states than there are now. And the whole like zeitgeist that happened from 21 and Bring Down the House, I think happened at that moment. And so eventually like we decided to write the book, Bring Down the House. It was a New York Times bestseller for over a year, and then eventually got turned into a movie called 21, which made $150 million off a $35 million budget. And then Ben went on to write The Accidental Billionaires, which got turned into a movie called The Social Network, which essentially, won him an Oscar. And like, I essentially made Ben Mesrick who he is today. got an Oscar and, et cetera. But, that whole backdrop for me, like I was at an event last night where I was speaking and someone asked me, like my successes, how do I attribute or how do I break down luck versus skill? And there's so much luck in success. And I think like my world is, I would say is 90% luck in that moment in time. Getting Ben to write that book and getting sort of all the interest that people had really springboarded me into an opportunity, like gave me tons of opportunities. So I was at the time an entrepreneur. I'd started a few different companies, but when that book came out, there was a lot of interest in from a group in Newport Beach that was spearheaded by a baseball agent by the name of Jeff Morad. He'd been a really, with Scott Boras, probably the two biggest super agents in the world of baseball. And he and a guy by the name of Mike Kearns had an idea to start an athlete stock market. So you could buy and sell athletes just like they were stocks. And they wanted to start this company and they wanted someone to start it with them. And the company's called ProTrade. And so they recruited me to come start this with them. And that's really what springboarded my real, my main stage act as an entrepreneur, because I moved out to the Bay Area to do this with them. We got real investors from some of the big VC firms. And again, this is 2004 that this was happening. Started a company called ProTrade, which later morphed into a company called Citizen Sports. We sold that to Yahoo. I started another company. That company was called 10Xer. It was an analytics and developer. It was like a productivity software that we ended up selling to Twitter. I went on to lead data science and engineering at Twitter during a really interesting moment for them from probably like 2015 to 2018. And then eventually left there, did some work in the hospitality industry. So hospitality tech, helping do dynamic pricing for about 3,000 different hotels. And the reason I mention that is because that's really what gave me a lot of the early beginnings of how I think about golf and golf tech, because I do see a lot of parallels between what happened in the hotel industry over the last 20 years and what really should be happening in the golf industry in the next 20. And then eventually left there, did some work in the sports betting world, but then eventually took an executive role at Microsoft, where I led all the startup work at Microsoft, trying to get startups to build on Microsoft technologies, et cetera. And then left there and with this sort of real appetite to do something in the world of golf. And, I was a COVID golfer, meaning I really started to play during COVID. I had played a fair amount before then, but never more than probably 3 to 6 rounds a year kind of thing. And then during COVID, got much more into golf and got much more excited about it.
Well, come back to golf certainly in a minute and talk about your role with Troon and your goals and objectives there, because I'm fascinated by how you're going to impact that part of the industry. But going back to your days, and you're obviously an entrepreneur. You've talked about creating companies and starting companies, and our audience are golf course owners, club managers, people that work in the golf space, and the fundamentally, the 15,000 golf courses, whatever it might be, that are around in North America that are fundamentally operated by entrepreneurs. I mean, they're mom and pops that run a business and have to run retail and have to run food and beverage and have to understand agronomy and marketing and budgeting and financing. And so in your experience, Jeff, you talked earlier on about luck. I mean, luck plus hard work equals success. I mean, it's the people that take advantage of luck, right, that can turn into something. But are there some things that you feel like entrepreneurs can learn from gambling? You talked about, the data, right? And gambling is about data, but obviously there's risk taking as well. And you told a great story at Golf Inc. about lying on the ground in your hotel room, one night, right? But what do you think are some of the lessons, good and bad, that entrepreneurs can learn from risk taking, I guess, gambling?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few that are really important. I think one is, I think entrepreneurs need to think about like long-term. I think if you look at a lot of mature businesses, especially like private equity backed businesses, there is a lot of like short-term thinking, unfortunately, that goes into play because you're thinking about this time horizon where you want to sell the company and or even on like publicly traded companies, at Twitter, we were constantly, thinking about what we would do each quarter for our earnings calls. And short-term thinking is not great. And in the world of blackjack, because you have a small edge, right? Like our edge was roughly around 2% over the casino. You need to play for a long time to maintain that edge and to have that edge be like realized. And any hand you could lose, right? And this is the idea of like if I flipped a quarter and told you like, hey, if it's heads, I'm going to pay you $1. If it's tails, you pay me 50 cents. You'd want to do that a lot. But if you happen to lose the first 3 flips, you wouldn't want to quit. You'd want to keep going, right? And so thinking a lot of long term is a big important thing from I think one of the important things to note is that I wouldn't call what we did gambling per se, because gambling is entering into this transaction where the odds aren't in your favor, right? In our case, we knew the odds were in our favor. And so there is like a slight nuance to the idea of a traditional gambler versus what we would call like an advantage player, someone that has an advantage that they know they have. And so so that idea of like, we have a small edge, we want to, kind of like do it as many times as we can. So we want to think long-term. That's very similar to how an entrepreneur should think, where they should be thinking long-term about what they do. If they think short-term, it's just not a great way to build a business. And again, like you see this in enterprises that are public. One of the smartest things that Elon did when he took over Twitter is that he literally just made the company private. So they didn't have to do earnings calls. They didn't have to make bad decisions. And I think having that, freeing that company up to think differently and think long-term is important. I think another thing is, as you think about just the world of what you learn here, is that, there is a stubbornness that a gambler needs to have. Meaning, like, if I lose, like to your point, like back to the quarters analogy, if you lost 10 times in a row, you need to believe in your system, and you need to like believe that this process, and you need to, and you need to have a stubbornness to want to stick to this. And in many ways, that's the same thing with entrepreneurism, like where if something happens bad initially, you've got to fundamentally believe in your, like a lot of early stage building of products is iteration, meaning you build something, you learn something, you change. It's got to be an iterative approach or it's not going to work. And that's very true of, similar to the world of blackjack, where you just, again, got to stick with it. And so this idea of stubbornness and sticking with it is very universal between gambling and entrepreneurism. And then I think the final thing is just this concept in the world of blackjack. We played as a team, and there's quite a bit of trust that had to go in when you play as a team, because essentially what we're doing is we're trying to scale our ability to make money via a team. And in an entrepreneur, you have to do that. If you start a company, you're not going to be successful if it's just you, and you're going to have to build a team and scale and trust those people to do their job and put them in the right place to succeed. And that's similar to what the world of blackjack is.
Man, so much there. You made me think about the Bob Parsons. We were fortunate enough to be in the TechCon conference recently in Texas, where Bob Parsons of PXG Golf and GoDaddy was talking about his stubbornness and about, like investing. And one of the things that I took from his conversation and from his book, Fire in the Hole, is about his passion for his projects were not driven by becoming a billionaire. At least that's what he messages and communicates. And in the golf space now, Scott and I, my business partner, Scott and I are, we're newbie techies, right? We're like 3 or 4 years old. We're trying to figure this out. We're club managers, golf professionals that have become entrepreneurs in the tech space. And there's so much technology now, and entrepreneur technology, when you think about the Jay Gordons of the world and the Ross Liggett's of the world and all these Mike Henderson of the world, a variety of different, what I call entrepreneurs, I never feel like they're doing it to make money, to make a buck. And I feel like they're doing it because they're passionate about their product. They're passionate about what they feel they're bringing to the industry to make the industry better. When you were building and starting companies and you build a few and sold a few and been very successful at it, were you aiming to create an investment vehicle that you could sell one day for 10 times the cost, or were you just passionate about the topic and just, once again, consider yourself lucky that you made millions of dollars on it back then?
Yeah, I mean, I think entrepreneurs, certainly some are motivated by money. I mean, I've never really been motivated by money. The only time that I ever really started thinking about money is when I started having kids, because you just realize like you need to provide for them. I mean, I think like a lot of entrepreneurism is really about just like wanting the journey and having some like itch that I need to scratch or something, right? Like in for me, I went to MIT with a mechanical engineering degree. I went into finance because I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer, didn't like finance, and so had to figure out what I wanted to do. This is in the mid 90s, and the internet was basically being born. Went and learned how to program and be a developer, and did that, and then started understanding that if you can do that, you can build things, and if you can build things, you can build companies. And so I just started doing that, and I didn't ever really think a lot about. I mean, for me, it was like a way to have a job, right? It was like I can do this, and I can hire myself, and I don't know what I would do otherwise. Meaning, like I didn't think of myself as an incredibly employable human being at that time. And I got lucky in a lot of situations. Have never been motivated by money. I think the one probably biggest mistake that I ever made was the last company that I started. They ended up selling to Twitter. I did really want to start a company, and I think I wanted to start a company, and I also wanted to be a solo founder. And I think both of those were like really, really bad decisions, because being a solo founder is like really lonely. And, I am very much a team person. So I wanted to be part of a team. So I missed that. And then really wanting to start a company is a bad motivation for starting a company. Your motivation for starting a company should be around like a problem that you want to solve, or something that and again, like people will say like passionate about. I think that's like a little bit cliche. It's more just like there's something that interests you that you're interested in exploring, and that intellectual curiosity should drive you to something. Like in the golf space, that was definitely what drove me, is I had an intellectual curiosity around like how we could, improve some of the things that were happening in golf.
When you first started thinking about getting into the golf world, you've talked about previously about becoming a COVID golfer and getting passionate about golf and hanging out with other people that were in the golf space, and all of a sudden. But what were your initial? What would you say were your initial thoughts about the way technology was in the golf space? Like the way that technology was either not there, or it was coming there, or it was underutilized, or what were your initial kind of perceptions to say, hey, there's an opportunity here, and I don't know what my role will be, but there's an opportunity from a technology standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not going to shock anyone that I think that golf technology is a little bit behind, and I think there's a lot of reasons for why that is. But I also know that it's going to move forward, and that I think this is an interesting moment. I spent some time with Jake Gordon from Notify in New York this week. And I obviously have been doing a bit of the like tech conference circuit in golf, and so I've really started meeting a lot more of the vendors. I think the troubling thing often is that there's just not enough owners and operators at these events, where that is the area where we want to have that dialogue and that conversation, and where people should be embracing new things. I think one of the challenges that I see, and you didn't ask me this, but I'll tell you what I think the challenges are, is that the people that operate golf courses, specifically the GMs, I don't think they have as a priority like a lot of the things that we're talking about from a technology vendor perspective, meaning like how do we solve no-shows and cancellations, or how do we do better dynamic pricing, or how do we do better targeting of golfers based on the data we know about them, right? Like the history behind golf is that, like you want your course to be run well, you want the greens to be great, you want the conditions to be great, and you want to be hospitable, right? Like that, those are like the priorities. And at no point in that statement did someone say we want like 100% utilization on the course, or we want to make sure that our average revenue per golfer continues to increase, or we want to create automated marketing campaigns to drive more golfers into soft periods of our tee sheet. And again, I'm not faulting anyone. I just think that the GM that's in place right now is often someone that like came up through the system, and what they've been incentivized and what they believe is important for them is not necessarily some of the stuff that we're talking about from a technology standpoint. So you don't really have like a captivated customer to sell in these different solutions.
Yeah, and I would piggyback on that to add that I think we've been operating and managing and consulting with golf courses for 20 plus years, and very rarely are the metrics of success related to things like yield utilization, dynamic pricing, dollar per customer. When your staff aren't even putting in the number of people sitting at a restaurant table properly because they can't figure out how to use the point of sale software, and you can't figure out what's your dollar per customer in the restaurant, well, then it's pretty tough to hold people accountable to financial metrics and operationally. And this is a very generalized statement because there are certainly organizations that lead the way when it comes to metrics and KPIs and data and using that data to make good decisions. But how many years ago we have large organizations didn't even have revenue managers, or they certainly didn't have technology officers, or they didn't have people that were focused on these types of things that can add so much to the bottom line. I always say you'll spend $50,000 on bunker sand, but you won't spend $5,000 on training your people to, capture the right kind of data or to upsell someone a glove in the golf shop. So were there numerous kind of opportunities that you thought about in the golf space, or did all of a sudden just Troon just kind of, become that first opportunity that you, how did you take the job? Why did you take the job? Tell us a little bit about your role. Then I want to ask you a little bit about kind of your goals and objectives with Troon. My mentor is a vice president with Troon, Jim McLaughlin, who I've often mentioned on our podcast. Everything I learned in the golf business that is positive, I learned from Jim. He's an unbelievable mentor and leader, and a big fan of Troon. I've been watching them over the years and have lots of peers that have worked in that organization. But tell us about how did that happen, if you don't mind, or more importantly, why you thought that was a good fit for you.
Yeah, so I when I left Microsoft, I knew, or at least had a thesis, that I wanted to do something in golf. I thought golf was like kind of at an interesting moment, and I also thought that myself, there was a lot I could offer to the industry in terms of just my background being somewhat different than a lot of people that work in the industry. And I'm a big believer that cross pollination of in companies and in industries is like, there's a book called Range, which is by a guy by the name of David Epstein. And it's all about how like generalized versus specialized learning, and generalized learning is like way better. The concept is like Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer, where Tiger was, and this is almost like this book is almost a direct response to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, concept, which is, I think, largely been debunked as not true. Like, you don't need specialization. I mean, certainly specialization can work, but generalization is better. And my career has been a lot of generalization. And so, coming into golf as an individual that's done stuff in many different facets was exciting, right? It was exciting to try to bring different types of thinking into golf. And so the two places that I spent a lot of time almost initially were Troon. And so I was lucky enough to meet a guy by the name of Paul Hackwell, who is the TPG partner that serves on the Troon's board. And they're obviously big investors in Troon. And he introduced me to Tim Shantz, and then I started consulting with Troon. While I was doing this, I was also spending a bit of time with Artie Stars, who was the CEO of Topgolf. And at that time, this is in 2003, and Topgolf was kind of a rocket ship, and it was doing really well. And so the concept of off course or non-green grass golf, where that was going to go, and I watched a really interesting short that Eric Anders Lang did on screen golf in Asia, specifically in Korea.
Yeah,
and it just kind of captured my imagination in a lot of ways. But what I thought was more interesting at the end of the day was traditional green grass golf and what we could do there. And Topgolf, while it's interesting, it's more of an F&B play than it is necessarily a golf play. And obviously there are really interesting opportunities to build off of a business that has so many people that go through its doors, 20 some million that go through the doors every year. But the thesis, and the simple thesis, and I brought this up earlier, was that I had been in this, world of hospitality tech where we're doing dynamic pricing for 3,000 hotels. And I just saw this parallel between when I was at this company, Duetto, managing this software and whatnot. I saw some of the challenges that hotels had around distribution and relying on third parties for distribution, like the OTAs, whether it's Expedia or Travelocity or Booking. And then if you watched what happened or watch what has happened over the last really 10 years there, it's been this move towards the direct business based on the franchise or the flag that you're with. So the Marriotts of the world have Bonvoy, Hilton has their own app, Hyatt has their own app. And, who is the Marriott or the Hilton or the Hyatt in the world of golf? Well, it's Troon. And, what is the greatest thing that we can do for our courses, specifically our public and daily fee courses? And that's really to help them drive demand and help them own their customers and help them, not necessarily need to rely on third-party distribution to get them business. And what are the best ways to do that? Well, it's build them technology, build them tools, and also build a program. And so to your point of what are we doing there, this program that we're trying to build called Access is really around the idea of providing our courses and whatever courses want to work with us a way to directly sell to the courses out, the golfers out there, and be part of a global rewards program that, if you're part of, incentivizes golfers to play at your course and to play more often at your course.
So, what do you think in your experience, I guess, with hotels, and I guess certainly so far with Troon? I mean, one of the things we talk about is the loyalty factor in the golf space and what do golfers want. And, I've often preached about the importance of creating relationships with people, and that we don't sell a widget, we sell an experience, and people are going to enjoy an experience at course A and less of an experience possibly at course B, and they're going to make these choices about how they spend their dollars or where they go. And when they travel, they're going to, same thing, they're going to go places where they know they're going to get consistency or service or quality or experience, whatever that might be. When you think about, what do you think golfers want, and once again, I don't, people talk about pricing. Okay, I'm just okay, who thinks Pebble Beach is worth $800? Well, a non-golfer, it's ridiculous. It's not worth $800 for a second. But if you're a bucket list kind of person and you've been saving up for your life to play a golf course you've wanted to play for your entire life, you'd pay $800 if you had it. So how do you look at creating loyalty, and what are the factors that you think is what golfers want that a program like Access, for example, could deliver, or I guess the Troon experience could deliver? And I think that maybe relates back to, I was going to ask you the question about starting your own technology space in the golf business as opposed to working with an organization like Troon and helping them develop their technology, I'm assuming, to create a greater benefit to their customers or their courses. But it gets back to that experience, and so what do you think golfers want, and especially when it comes to be part of a loyalty platform or to be part of of an organization that they want to keep patronizing?
I mean, I think at the top level, golfers want an easy way to book tee times, right? I think that the market is just like too fragmented in that, if you think about it right now, what do you do if you want a tee time? Like, if you're traveling somewhere, you probably Google golf in, let's say, Southern California. You say golf in Southern California, and like a bunch of content will come up, a bunch of whatever. Golf Now probably comes up, like maybe a course or two comes up. And how do you know where you want to play, right? And I think you're probably word of mouth. You probably ask someone. Let's just say you get the name of a course, and one of our courses like Monarch Beach. Let's say Monarch Beach. And so you type in Monarch Beach, you get a bunch of links to book golf tee times. Like, one of them is probably Golf Now. One of them is the Golf Monarch website. Now, let's say you want to book direct, and kind of you're savvy enough to think about booking direct. And so you go to Monarch Beach website, you click on it. You are not going to a optimized funnel or conversion path for tee times. You go to a website, and this is traditionally, like, we've changed a lot of this for our courses where you can go directly to a booking engine at that point. Like, and especially if you go off of like the Google Actions link or something like that, you're going directly to a booking engine. But once you go, like, traditionally, you go to a website, and that website has everything from like information about the junior program to weddings to banquets. And then somewhere on that page, you find a book a tee time link.
Yeah.
Now, not only you not, optimize for that, you click that book a tee time link, and that's still not going to the booking engine.
Right.
That's going to another page, which maybe has a list of 3 different types of booking engines that you might want to go to. And you got to say, like, okay, am I public? Or am I public outside of 30 days? Am I local member? Like, it's like all this, and you got to figure it out. And, anything that we know in web usability is that the more steps you introduce, the worse your conversion is. People just drop off. And I've said this to people in the golf industry, and they don't even believe me. They're saying, like, oh, if they're going to book a tee time, they're going to book a tee time. It's actually not true. Like, we've done like some pretty simple things, like abandoned search or abandoned cart, meaning like, if we see you on our website and we see you looking for a tee time and you drop off, we can send you an email saying that tee time is still available. And that email alone converts at close to 15%. So wow. 15% of the people that dropped off with just an email were willing to come back and convert. And so that experience itself is so suboptimal. And so we are trying to create, a more optimal experience for our golf courses, the golf courses we work with, so that what I described to you, I could describe to you in about, 5 fewer minutes or whatever, however long it took me to describe that.
What are some of the challenges you mentioned earlier on? And once again, in a very generalized way, I'm not suggesting specifically from a Troon standpoint, but we talked earlier on about adoption at the site level of all of the tools that are available. We were talking the other day at TechCon about even the email marketing tools that are currently integrated in POS systems, basically speaking, have about a 20% usage rate. So of all the other tools and things that are built into a current T-sheet or an email system platform or a CRM platform, they're not being utilized at the club level. So what are some of the conversations you have, or what are some of the suggestions you would have for operators and GMs to embrace these tools to achieve better results?
I mean, I don't know if that's completely a fair question, meaning that I don't think they have the time to do it or the resources to do it often. And so for you to say, like, hey, head golf pro, like, you should be out there emailing people and whatnot. I don't know if that's like a fair thing to sort of like suggest that someone should be doing. So I think that would be my first thing, is that you have to like understand resourcing better, and you have to be like realistic about resourcing and priorities. That's why I think like the most important thing is probably creating automation around this and not requiring an individual that doesn't probably have a tremendous amount of background in marketing or email marketing. And, again, like the automation and this is where like AI and things like that, I think are probably pretty useful, although it's a very primitive kind of AI. It's not like AI that we've developed in the last 6 months. It's AI that's been around for a long time. It's just automation and whatnot. So it's like I think there is just this notion that and I think a lot, when I think about that time that we spent at TechCon, one of the reasons I love that conference, it was the best conference that I've been to from a golf perspective. And the reason I liked it is I met a lot of individual owner operators, right? I live in the MCO world, right? So I don't see that world. And that world to me, like I left there like almost like my heartstrings were being pulled by these people that had been like, PGA pros and had bought golf clubs on SBA loans and, were incredibly successful because of it. But like, they don't have the resources or tools or even just the background to understand some of the things that I'm talking about trying to build. And so for me, like one of the constituents that I'd love to try to serve are individual golf course owner operators because, I believe that they're sort of the lifeblood in many ways of the industry. And how do we as Troon and how do I as Jeff Ma further support them through the technology that we're building, right? This is not, I think Troon made this investment, and to the credit of Tim and the TPG guys and everyone, Ruth and everyone that okayed this and built this team with me and has welcomed me into the industry. They've had just a tremendous desire to figure out how we can help our golf courses with technology. And again, one of the things that I always struggle with are what we would call misaligned incentives. It's like how do we, if someone's building a business and their incentive isn't necessarily to help golf courses make more money, but make more money themselves. Well, at Troon, and you kind of asked me like, why did I do this at Troon versus like doing this on my own? And it's because I can enter a situation where I have completely aligned incentives with the golf course. It's like we manage your golf course. In some cases, we own that golf course. All I care about is helping you make more money, right? Like I think one of the challenges that we see in the industry is that the only golfer that we really serve well in the public space is the discount-minded golfer, right? That golfer that's looking for discounts, we can give them value all the time. We can find tee times that are underutilized. We can, whatever. But that's the race to the bottom ultimately. And what we should be doing, and you asked me this question too, which is like, what do I believe a rewards program should do for a golfer? And I think what we'd love to do is really be able to provide access to that golfer. And that's why we call it access, right? We do start just like everyone else with this concept of like a loyalty discount, right? The core access premium program allows you to get 15% off anytime you play one of our properties. Our theory with that is, while it's 15% off a bar, if we give you increased demand, if this cohort is repeatable increased demand, like demand you can count on, you can revenue manage around that 15% so that it's not actually 15% off your top line. It's accretive to your top line because you get more demand. And again, like what we're trying to encourage people to do, many of the discount programs that you see are based on last minute discounting. If I, as a golfer, know that I can wait to the last minute and get cheap tee times, I'm going to do that. And then you've like totally effed yourself in the ability to do any revenue management because you're literally just incentivizing people to wait to now. Is there a place where we can use discounting and ultimately I don't what I want to see is, can we drive demand with not discounting but with just like marketing, right? Like we know you like to play weekdays and we know that there's availability or softness in the schedule in a couple of weeks on a weekday. Can we just send you and tell you that's available? Can we give you a small discount to know that's available? Can we incentivize you with other offers? And again, that's why the rewards product is awesome, because can we give you extra points for that instead of, like Open Table does the $1,000 points, reservations, and you got to go eat at 4:30 or something like that. But, it's like that is what it is. And some people care and value that. And, with our rewards program, which is going to have amazing, experiences tied to it and perks tied to it. And we have an online store that you can buy things from our partners at and all that. Like that's all going to be part of this rewards program, which we believe will make golfers really interested in earning these points? And then if they are, then we can provide a real value to our courses. I mean, one of the other things that I find interesting, or that I think a little bit about, is this whole like model that Amex has had in the past with their Resi, where you can attach your platinum card and you get access to unique reservations, right? And what they literally do there is they tell these restaurants to hold back some prime reservations, knowing that they can fill them with these great customers. We could do something similar with golf, because again, this is now, how do we find that cohort? In Scottsdale, I don't know how many people would you guess in Scottsdale are on a wait list for a private club and unable to get on there, right? They would be dying. They're obviously not price sensitive. They're waiting for $100,000 or $200,000 membership. They just want to be able to play golf at a good place and not have to make the reservation 90 days in advance. And so, is that an opportunity to provide interesting, access for golfers? And again, access is the name of the program. We kind of stumbled upon it, but the more we use it, the more we realize that is what we really want to be, is access for golf.
What I would love to take away, many things there, but one of the things that I would want an individual owner operator to take away from that chat a little bit is the switching of the mindset of discounting versus bundling, because one of the things you're kind of talking about there is bundling a little bit, right? About adding other benefits as opposed to 20% off. Keep your retail rack rate and add things to it that is giving other perks and benefits that is still going to, generate perceived value to the guest, but it's not a discounting. And that's why, we've done this to ourselves. And I think I might have this question coming up later on, but I'm going to ask it now, which Jeff, is that, if you're, Troon would know this as would anyone else that's been in the business long enough to know the ups and downs and the waves, and I'm not going to say my normal, you've been broken before COVID, you're still broken speech, but what, when the market starts to decrease a bit, when there is flattening, and there's certainly signs in certain places where some of that might be happening, do you think the industry will go back to the discounting or do you think the industry has learned from the last experience? And that might be an unfair question to ask you, but I worry that we're going to go back to believing that 25% off is going to solve our problems when we start to see possibly a flattening or a little bit of a dip, whether it's the economy that factors these things, whether it's going back to work in the office. There's numerous things that could impact T-sheet demand, including, travel abroad and getting, getting on a plane and going to other countries to travel and tourism. So there's lots of factors out there of these things that can happen. Do you think that we're better prepared, or would you say Troon is probably better prepared to deal that with your data and with your analytics and with your model, I guess you're talking about? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're building hopefully mitigates some of that risk. We obviously can't mitigate the economy broadly speaking, and I think what I would say is let's not make decisions out of fear or fear of what the industry may become. And what I think is interesting about golf is that I think COVID was obviously a very interesting moment. It was an interesting moment in many ways. It changed just what we're doing right now. We didn't do this nearly as much, right?
Right.
And I think golf in itself is you just have a lot of really interesting, innovative thinking coming into golf. When I was out in Frisco, I went by and saw a golf ranch, right? Which is, an unbelievable project that, Devin Charlton and his crew are putting together to really up the game on driving ranges and what that experience looks like. And I think that, more than say a Top Golf, because that is more geared towards golfers, creates more opportunities for green grass golf. I think the simulator world, right? One of the problems, I did a lot of interviewing with golfers early on, and when you do a discovery process around a new business or around a new industry, you do something called customer interviews, where you literally just ask these people questions and you learn a bit about what problems that a golfer has that you need to solve. And one of the questions, and I encourage anyone that's in the the technology or whatever world to like study the concept of customer development, because essentially what you do is you interview people with these sort of open-ended questions to get, like, you don't say like, hey, if I built a new cheat sheet for you, what would you say, like, what's your average day look like when you golf? Describe it to me from the beginning. Describe to me your best day. Describe to me your worst day. What was a day that got you so upset that you didn't want to come play? And almost to a man or to a man/woman, it was all around slow play was always the bad thing. On the good side, and again, another thing that was a big contributor both on the good and bad side was literally how you played, right? And anyone that plays golf knows that's true.
Yeah.
If you're out there and you're striking the ball and you're flushing it and you're playing well, this is the best sport ever. When you can't hit the ball off the tee and you duff a shot, I don't want to be out here, right?
Yeah.
And so again, like, obviously on the flip side, and when you're playing bad, you're still outside, you're walking around, you're hanging out with your friends, like, it's great. But the idea of people being better and having there be more opportunities for you to get better through sims like non-green grass golf, I think that is going to contribute to people enjoying the sport more and being able to be better at the sport. Because it's not going to be as hard to go and practice. I live in a place where the nearest course to me is probably the nearest 18-hole course to me is probably still 20 some minutes away. And so it's hard for me to go practice, because it's a round trip. It's, I have 2 young kids, but they just put a drive box at my swim and tennis club that's a mile away. And I can walk in and hit balls. And that is going to hopefully have a fundamental impact on my ability to play golf.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that will have downstream impacts on the stickiness of the game. It may take a little while. I do think but I think the new breed of golfers is a bit different, right? I think they're less interested potentially in country club golf. They want more variety. And again, I think that's something that hopefully Access can help with.
When one of the things that I really appreciated with you, if I may, because I saw you kind of in action when we were at Golf Inc., you were really embracing and spending time learning about the different technologies that are out there and the different companies that are, have got platforms, right? Whether it's Metolius or whether it's Notify or whether it's Golf District or whomever it was, you appear, you certainly appear like you want to learn and you want to learn about what's out there and who's doing what. And when with your role with Troon and I guess what's happening now in the industry, and I come back from the operator's perspective of how do I figure out all this stuff? How do I figure out AI? How do I figure out what technology I should use and how do I use it? And as you said, rightfully so earlier on, certain MCOs have the ability to spend focused time and focused resources and people to solve these things. But your day-to-day mom and pop operator is not always going to have the ability or the time or the skill set to figure this stuff out. Do you think that this integration, I guess, that I would say appear to be witnessing of tech companies working together and POS companies adding integrations with various different technology, whether it's weightless technology or voice activated technology, whatever it might be. I'm assuming you think that's a good thing. I think I'm going to ask you that question, but is that something that from a Troon standpoint you see as being a benefit? Is that one of the things that you're kind of looking for, or what are these other kinds of technologies that can help us get access to deliver the kind of experience that we wanted to deliver? Or do you think it needs to be more homegrown, I guess?
I think it's, it kind of takes a village into these things. And I think that the overall industry is pretty fragmented. And I don't know if like necessary consolidation is the answer, meaning like, again, if you go back to the analogy of Marriott and Bonvoy, the consolidation probably happened more on the different like flags. So that would be the different MCOs in this case. I think it's great to have vendors that are friendly and that are talking to each other and that are trying to work together. What I worry about in golf with the sort of fragmented vendor situation is that you have, Notify, and again, like why Notify is such a great product is because of its like blunt forceness, and it's almost like not a great product. That's why it's a great product, right? It's not elegant, right? You would never say Notify is elegant. It literally sits on top of your website, and it's like a lead gen for golfers, but it works, right? And again, like the things that Jake has built at work. But when I think about that at the end of the day, is that a standalone product and company? And I said this at Golf Inc. I think the challenge with a lot of software businesses in golf is I don't think they are venture scaled businesses, meaning like they are not going to drive $100 million revenue business. The overall TAM, for something like a Notify is not huge, right? At the end of the day. And so that in itself, caps the opportunity that I think entrepreneurs would see in golf. And so you get like this sort of natural selection bias on entrepreneurs in golf that are really people that are generally just passionate about golf and want to work in golf and want to do something, and they're willing to overlook the overall like TAM opportunity. And so I think the answer to your question is it is great to have like an open ecosystem with entrepreneurs able to build things on top of other things. What I worry about, and again, like you go back to like, if you compare, like in my mind at least, right? And I don't want to talk disparagingly about anyone's product, but I always want to understand like what is the real problem that you're solving for a golf course. And, like so much of what we've seen from a problems perspective, right, stem from the idea that tee times are generally not enforced from a cancellation policy. They're not prepaid. So it's when you try to just, like charge someone, you have a difficult time to doing it. There's no expectation that if you don't cancel, you're going to get charged. And so we've had to like create all these like duct tape solutions to try to solve that. When the reality is like we, as a, paradigm, we got to think like, okay, guys, this is like lost revenue. So we got to be a bit more strict on how we think about this. And then the technology should be built on, us having the right paradigm or philosophy around just tee times in general.
Some questions just rolled in, and it might have been they might have been hung up in my platform. I apologize, but I just got a handful of them real quick here. So we've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to try to touch on a couple things. But one of them revolves around, I guess, your guys' booking engine, and there was a lot of talk at the conference about, and conferences, and there's lots of chat these days, period, about AI, Google, Reserve with Google, Golf Now, various different third-party aggregators, the stories of bots, once again, a lot for an individual owner-operator to kind of understand and kind of manage. You just mentioned a second ago, and we've talked about this at great length, that, you can't buy an airline ticket or a hockey ticket without paying in advance, yet you can, reserve a $200 tee time and sometimes put down $10 and sometimes put down your credit card and sometimes, pay in advance, but not always. With Troon, are you trying to, or have you moved to prepaid tee times for public golf facilities? Is that a goal and direction? And then in a similar vein, there was a kind of a question about, your ability when you mentioned that when the person left the website booking, that you were able to send them an email. And so obviously at some point you had their email address in some capacity, whether in the booking process or because they had already logged in or something, I guess, to a Troon rewards program. But could you comment on a couple of those things?
Yeah. So the first one was about, I just like looking at these questions. I mean, I think it is not optimal for Reserve with Google to offer more than one booking link. I think if you can have Reserve with Google actually go directly to your website, it's going to convert much better. And you should be able to do that. All of the T-sheet providers right now should be able to do that. And you basically just need to go and opt out of all of the other ones that are on your listing. Just go and literally you have to email these people and tell them you want to opt out. And if there's only one, it'll go directly to your website. And so, yes, that is best practice there. In terms of like prepay at Troon courses, yeah, I think we'd want them to do that, but I am not an ops leader. And so for me to tell people what they should do at their course, that's not my job. Like, meaning like I would love to suggest best practices, but at some level, I need to be deferential to the people that really run these golf courses and not be the guy that thinks he knows everything and suggest to them something that they don't want to do. In terms of email, yeah, I mean, like one of the dumbest things about booking these tee times is you go to like 4 different websites and each one of them you have to log into and you have to have a different username and all that kind of stuff. And so one of the beauties of our booking engine is that we know you log in once, you're there, and you go back to the website, we know who you are, and you come back to, and you don't have to re-log in. It's like simple. So yeah,
Right.
so that's how we know.
And obviously, I mean, one of the benefits I would assume, and with any of the MCOs, I mean, you want to, and it's like any golf course should have this lesson, is owning your own database, right? I mean, we at least we talk about that. We talk about the importance of having the ability to communicate to your own golfers, understanding who your golfers are, being able to segment your golfers into a variety of different categories so that you can understand, as you mentioned, what their needs are, when they like to play, what they're looking for. Lastly, I guess, Jeff, AI and what's happening with AI, and I guess let's just take it a step further, and if I may, try to re-talk about the day-to-day operator of a golf course, and whether it's a Troon managed property or whether it's Mr. and Mrs. Smith that own their grandfather's farm. What are some of the advice, words of wisdom that you would give an operator about implementing or managing technology, or implementing or managing AI, or implementing or managing the variety of different technologies that are out there, or they're being promoted to them that's going to save their business, to whether it's about maximizing their tee sheet or dynamic pricing, or it's rewards and loyalty programs? I mean, what kind of advice would you give someone that is trying to manage this behemoth of explosion of technology that is now available to golf course operators?
I mean, I think I would start. So if I'm an owner operator, let's just talk about that, like, customer. I think I am trying to understand, like, what are my goals, right? Like, and if I have a goal, and I literally like ask this, it's like, do you want to make more money at your golf course? Because you would argue that like some munis don't, right? You'd argue that some, things that are public good, that have rate caps, don't, right? So I think the first thing in any situation is you got to really identify like what your objective function is or what your goals are. So once you do that, then you say like, well, what are the things that I can do to lever that goal? And ultimately, as any kind of an organization, you probably have more than one goal, right? You probably have make revenue, have happy customers, like whatever. And so as you think about these things and you set these goals, you can also set numbers or like key results or whatever around these. And then you think, okay, well, what are the initiatives that I can do to do this? Again, like one of our courses had mentioned, or the golf district guys had mentioned, like, hey, one of your courses is interested in working with us. And so I said, okay, let me go talk to them and figure out what they want to do. And my job there is to understand, like, what are they trying to get out of golf district? What is the thing that they're doing? And it turns out that course does not do dynamic pricing because of like wanting to protect some group business or something like that. And so they're figuring out, like, how do we drive some more revenue without doing dynamic pricing? And that was what they were doing. And is golf district the best way to do it? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But like, is again, like what I think as a owner operator, before saying like, oh, what technology should I use? It's like, what are my goals? And then what are the technology out there that can help me achieve that goal?
Yeah, totally. 100%. Jeff, look, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We could talk for another hour. Love to have you on again, but really appreciate you giving us your time today. And we've got lots of people. There's still some questions are coming in right now, and I wish we could get to all of them. But thank you to the listeners that joined us. As always, we will see you again next month with another live Q&A call. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you on the inside.
Thanks.